Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Varun Sriram with UCAN, and we are here to talk about how to fuel your personal best in triathlon. And my goodness, do we have a special panel for you tonight. Really excited to be joined by pro triathletes Dede Griesbauer, Lauren Brandon. Dede and Lauren, thank you for staying up late with us. I know we were just joking before we got on here that this is a little bit past the normal bedtime. You can't train as hard as you guys do without getting your beauty sleep. But thank you guys so much for being here today. And we have Bob Seebohar as well, not to sell you short, Bob. Bob is a sports dietitian, former US Olympic dietitian for the US Triathlon team. He's worked with a whole number of athletes from all skills, all age groups. Bob, thank you for being here with us tonight as well.
Thank you, Varn. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, guys. Well, let's, before we really dive into the meat of the topic where, we're going to really get the specifics of what Dede and Lauren do for fueling. We're going to get a really good framework from Bob in terms of how to approach nutrition, how to think about nutrition. There's so many different fueling products and different types of ways to fuel out there. So we want to both give you guys a framework for how to think about this and then give you some specifics, both when it comes to UCAN, like especially when it comes to UCAN and fueling with UCAN. How do the pros do it? How can you implement some of what they're doing and what's kind of an overall way to think about it. So we're going to definitely get into all of that. But off the top, before we really dive into the meat of this, I like to give folks a little bit of a chance to get to know all of you, So Dede, let's start out with you. You've been in the sport, have a lot of experience in the sport. You've been, I'm saying that in a nice way, but you're an amazing,
you can say it, I'm old.
You're an amazing athlete. You're an incredible athlete. Like, what drives your passion for triathlon and how did you get involved in the sport?
Yeah, I got involved in the sport. I think in many ways, like a lot of people do, I saw it on television. I was in business school and should have been studying for finals, and I turned on the TV and I saw the Ironman and thought, I absolutely have to do that. I had been a collegiate swimmer. I had taken a bike trip across the country prior to business school. And when I was in business school, I'd run my first marathon. So I decided after business school, I had 3 months off before I had to start work. And I decided I was going to try to get as fit as I could in those 3 months and do an Ironman. And I was hooked. Yeah. And that was back in 1997. I turned pro in 2005. I had raced 2 years as an age grouper. So I did the one and done, raced a couple of years as an age grouper, and turned pro in 2005 at the age of nearly 35 and still going. I'm 51 and a half years old and don't plan to stop anytime soon.
And you're smashing records, Dede. You set the Ultraman record. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're kind of trying to do this year.
Yeah, I think, Ultraman, again, like my first Ironman, I had a friend that had done it and I thought, wow, I wonder if I could do that. The curiosity is what drives me to see what is physically possible. So for a number of years, it didn't really fit into my schedule. And I finally got to tick that box at Ultraman, Florida in 2020. Didn't realize they kept world records for that type of thing. And was the night before day 3, my coach told me that if I had run such and such a time, I would break the Ultraman world record. And I was like, why on earth would you tell me that? It felt like an awful lot of pressure. I didn't really realize that they kept records for such things, but it was a great event. It was an amazing experience and will go down as one of my favorite triathlon experiences of my career. Certainly just, it's not often after nearly 20 years of racing that you have a new experience in triathlon. And that's what Ultraman was for me. And it sort of reignited my passion in a way because it was something completely new.
Amazing. Well, we're excited to hear more from you about how you fuel all that incredible success and also what you've learned about fueling as, you've tackled different challenges in the sport.
Yep.
Lauren, let's learn a little bit about you. You're a pro triathlete as well, been on the podium a number of times at Ironmans at 70.3s, for a swimming background in college. So maybe take it from there. How did you develop a passion for triathlon and what motivates you to continue exploring in the sport?
Yeah, so like Dede, I swam in college and I actually had never really known much about triathlon. And then I met my husband in college and he had just turned pro. He had just become a professional triathlete. I was like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? What do you do? And so this was my freshman year of college, and I really started to learn about the sport. And I knew that when I was done with my swim career, I really wanted to do a triathlon. I remember the first one I went to was Escape from Alcatraz. And I just remember, like, I was so inspired by everybody because you saw people of all ages, all shapes, like just out there having a blast. And I was like, oh my gosh, this like just looks like so much fun. And so, you know, I didn't do my first triathlon. It was 5 years later. My first one was 2009, and similar to Dede, I raced as an age grouper for a year, then became a pro, and I've been a pro for about 11 years now, and I still love it. Like, you know, I'm still so passionate about it. It's the community, like it just excites me. Like every time you go to a race and there's a couple thousand people on the course with you, and you're just like sharing this experience with people, I absolutely love it. And whether I have a great race or a bad race, it's still like always just this great experience. And for me personally, I'm still kind of searching for, you know, my best race that I'm capable of. I still believe I have a lot of years ahead of me to get to that point. And so I just keep on training and, you know, hope to, yeah, just continue to improve.
I mean, across all sports, it's incredible how we're just seeing athletes get better and better, it seems, year over year. So yeah, I think just the amount of information and tools and, you know, and obviously just the mental toughness you guys possess to do this, anything's really possible. So it's exciting to hear about your story. Bob, let's hear a little bit about your experience, both as an athlete as well as working as a sports dietitian. You know, you've worked with team sport athletes back at the University of Florida several years ago at the Olympic level with the US Triathlon team. You've worked with strength and power athletes. We were just talking about you helping, you know, a woman with a stage race, or some type of like ultra race, excuse me, like 250-mile ultra race. So I mean, you've really spanned the gamut, and then you've done some of those things yourself. So share a little bit with us about what got you involved with what you're doing and what motivates you to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is probably the only time ever in my life I can actually say I beat Dede. Because my first triathlon was 1993. So I actually came from a team sport background. I was a competitive soccer player growing up. And I remember my sophomore year of undergrad, I had a buddy that was like, hey, you know, I dare you to do a triathlon. And I kind of have that competitiveness personality. If you dare me to do something, I'm of course going to step up. And I accepted the challenge, but I had no idea what a triathlon was, like literally no clue. So I was in, you know, those were the days, not to date, you know, a few of us, but there's no internet, there's no Google. I'm like, I have no idea what a triathlon. So I was asking people around, what's a triathlon? You know, then I found out it was a swim, bike, run. I was like, oh, well, you know, being a soccer player growing up, you know, we classified ourselves as land athletes, right? So I am not the swimmer. I did not grow up swimming. I grew up running on a field back and forth. So that was my introduction. And interestingly enough, that was my introduction in a triathlon. It was also I believe it was my introduction into sport nutrition and exercise physiology, because I had so many issues making the transition from team sport athlete to endurance athlete. And one, figuring out just the whole methodology of training, but two, my stomach blew up, Varn. I mean, you've heard my story before, but you know, playing soccer, you don't have enough time to have GI distress and all this stuff. But, you know, I was finding, even though I started with short course, you know, sprint an oldie distance before the halves and Ironman, my stomach just felt bad. And once I got up the distance, I was throwing up. I mean, every single porta potty on the marathon, off the bike, and the Ironman. So I think it was more of a continuation of, I needed to figure this out for me. But then once I, you know, graduated and became a registered dietitian, I started to notice that a lot of athletes were having the same experiences. So I kind of set out on this path of trying to, you know, as a male, I guess we try to fix things, right? And I wanted to fix GI distress. And, you know, for myself, biasly, but then I knew so many other athletes were having that I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So that kind of just dovetailed my career into what I'm doing now.
Amazing. And you have seen a real paradigm shift kind of in nutrition, right, over the years, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but maybe you could just kind of tease that a little bit. What have you seen in terms of an evolution in
Oh.
fueling and the way that nutrition is being recommended over the years?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I think with people who are kind of paying attention, that could be athletes, that could be dietitians, it could be coaches. If they're paying attention, we have seen this shift. Unfortunately, you know, with athletes in particular, they get a lot of information from the media, and the media doesn't, as we know, always provide all of the information or all of the data that I don't want to say is correct, but I am going to say is correct, right? So I think the shift is there. It's just whether or not athletes are paying attention to it, because unfortunately, even in nutrition majors still, and I'm getting wind of this, like the younger RDs coming through, they're still teaching a lot of what I call this old school. And it's a bit frustrating, right? Because they get in the real world and they're trying to help athletes, be it recreational age group or professional, and their mind is blown because they're like, well, we didn't learn this in school, right? It's literally old school versus new school.
Yeah, and so we'll definitely get a lot more into that, but that's a good teaser to set us up for some of what we're going to talk about today. You know, nutrition, they actually, before I dive into this, I do want to mention for anybody in the audience, if you guys do want to ask questions, we are going to leave some time at the end to get questions answered. So feel free to just put them in the chat. If it makes sense, if we're talking about a related topic, we'll also address them along the way, but we definitely want to be here as much for everybody who was kind enough to join us live tonight, to give up some of your Tuesday evening. I was like, what day is it? So yeah, really appreciate that. And we are here to answer any specific questions. But with nutrition and triathlon, it's, you know, they call it the fourth discipline of triathlon. It's so fundamental to success in the sport. Bob, you talked about, you know, wanting to fix GI distress. And I mean, I know you guys have heard it. You guys have probably experienced it. We've heard it time and time again. Like, that's one of the number one things that can blow up an athlete's race and make it an unpleasant experience. Dede and Lauren, I wanted to start with you, and Dede, maybe we'll start with you. What are some of the biggest challenges you've found with fueling and triathlon over the year? You've obviously had tremendous success, so you've been able to go through those challenges, but at the same time, you're still always tweaking, right? And trying to get better and make it easier. So what are some of the challenges you've faced over the years?
You know, again, I'm one of those athletes, and I always admire those people with an iron gut that seem to be able to house a pepperoni pizza and go out and run a marathon and not have any issues. If I look at a pepperoni pizza, I will be hitting every porta potty along the way. Like, I have a sensitive stomach, especially when I run. Like, I seem to be okay on the bike, but the problems present themselves on the run. And early in my career, my solution for that was to eat absolutely as little as possible to survive the event. So I was way underfueled, and sometimes I sort of got away with it and would manage to just, you know, be bullheaded and stubborn and get myself to the finish line. But over time, that chronic underfueling actually caught up with me, and I had a series of injuries. And so I really had to sit down and learn, okay, how do I fuel myself properly? Like, eating less isn't the answer. I have to figure out what I can eat and when I can eat it in order to fuel myself for performance. And it is so critical. I think the thing that kills me about nutrition is that when you think you have it nailed, and you have an experience that, I've got it. I had this race. I was successful. My stomach was happy. My energy was good. I was thinking clearly, making good choices all day. And you go and you replicate that exactly at the next race, and you're hitting the porta potties. And that's the thing that's just so cruel about, racing nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
No question. Different conditions, different circumstances. Yeah, it's one of the easiest things that can go haywire. Lauren, what about for you? What have been challenges you've faced over the years with nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very similar to Dede in that I have a very sensitive stomach, and, you know, I've always been trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And people always tell me, oh, eat solid foods. Like, you have to eat solid foods during an Ironman, like whether that's blocks or chews or waffles or whatever. And I'm like, I cannot handle that. Like, I can't chew anything, first of all. And like, it doesn't sit well. And so for me, like, I was just doing a ton of gels, but my problem was I didn't want to have those during training. So I would just race with them, and then, my stomach wasn't happy, but I didn't want to have like a tremendous amount of sugar every single day, because I know that's not fantastic for you. And so, yeah, like my problem was always just trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And like Dede, it still is mind boggling. Like you can have this perfect race where, like Ironman Hamburg, I had 0 stomach problems. I had a great race, felt amazing the entire time. Like used my UCAN. I grabbed like a couple more Morton gels like along the course because it was cold, so I just needed a couple extra calories, and everything was fantastic. And then it's like I did another Ironman and barely got through the bike. So it's, like, I mean, I ended up getting sick, but it's just like, it really is crazy. It depends if it's a hot race, cold race, and so you're always learning and adjusting. And I think that's what is fascinating about our sport, especially longer distances. We're always still learning. I mean, Dede and I have been doing this quite a while, and yeah, we're still adjusting, still learning, and yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating to hear that. Bob, for you working with athletes of all levels, like what about what Dede and Lauren said resonates, with you no matter what the level is? What are some other common things you hear from athletes when they come to you? Because I'm assuming, when you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming a lot of athletes come to you when they're in crisis, something went wrong and it's like, hey, I should work with a sports dietitian to figure this out. So what are the common reasons people come to you?
Yeah. Well, I would probably say the top 3 would be, weight loss, body composition changes for whatever reason. It could be health, it could be performance, aesthetics, whatever. Definitely, GI distress, kind of tying in the whole GI distress, improving metabolic efficiency, that kind of ties into everything. And, honestly, I think just the frustration of because there's so many nutrition, let me just call them strategies out there. You can call them diets if you want, but I'll call them strategies. It is completely confusing a lot of our recreational athletes because they don't know what to follow. And that leads to saying, oh, they watch the pros that they love to watch, right? And they'll be like, oh, Dede and Lauren do this. And, I have to remind them that that's kind of N of 1 too, right? Like we know the science, but we have to actually kind of get down to N of 1, male, female. Where are you in your developmental stage? Are you recreational? Are you highly competitive? Are you trying to go elite or pro? So I think those are probably the top 3 major issues when athletes come see me.
And one of the things that Lauren said, which, as you kind of mentioned, like, should the age grouper follow what the pros are doing? My eyes kind of lit up when Lauren said she doesn't want to take in that much sugar in her training, right? And that's probably something that the recreational triathlete or the age grouper should definitely be subscribing to and trying to follow, just from a health standpoint. But it was interesting, Lauren, to hear you bring that up specifically, that's kind of something that you think about as well.
Yeah.
Well,
so if I can say, Varn, I mean, amen, Lauren, thank you so much for saying that, because I think a lot of recreational triathletes need to know that, we're also focusing on health. And like, my thing is, like, if you're not healthy, you can't perform. And if you're using gels or whatever it is, like simple sugars every single day in training, like that's contributing so many added sugars that can actually have a really negative effect on some health parameters. And I've seen that, Varn. I mean, I do blood work testing with athletes, and I look at this lab work and I'm like, wow, it gets sometimes destroyed. And especially if they have any type of family history or genetic component to that. So I do just kind of want to piggyback and say, thank you, Lauren, for bringing that up. And I think a lot of the listeners should really, really emphasize and listen to that message. It's very powerful.
That's a good bridge, really, Bob, and I'll stay with you. So, kind of speaking of sugar specifically, and really like sugar and carbohydrate intake, like we talked a little bit off the top about some of the misconceptions or some of the sort of half studies you might hear reported when people are saying, like, this is what you need for performance. What has the historic kind of mainstream information been about what people need for performance in terms of whether we want to determine it as caloric intake or carbohydrate intake, sugar intake? And what are you finding as you've tried different strategies?
Yeah, I think I'd like to start just by saying, let's stop demonizing the macronutrients. Because of all these nutrition strategies, again, aka diets out there, I just feel like we're now trying to demonize carbohydrates or protein or fat. It's really more on the carbohydrate side of things. Like we know we need carbohydrates. We absolutely do. But this is what's changed over the past 20, 25 years is, we used to go the whole food guide pyramid, carbs, 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 low protein, low fat. Now we're getting wind that, from a health perspective, maybe that's not the best thing, right? As a society and as a population. And we don't have anything concrete, but we have been having all these different nutrition strategies come along. And, from the keto craze to the LCHF to, you name it, it's out there, right? What I would say is we've progressed into believing one model is right, into now exploring the periodization of the macronutrients. So looking at when our body needs more carbs or fewer carbs, when our body needs more protein or less protein, when we need more fat or less fat, that changes not only based on competitiveness, training cycle, training blocks, but also as we age, right? And certainly male and female, there's a lot of physiological data coming out now. Well, even though it's still in its infancy, we know that there are gender differences, right? So I think that's where we've been, was food guide pyramid. Where we are now, which is kind of confusing again to consumers because it's even tough for me to keep up on all this, is now exploring how do we periodize this for that athlete? And that is what's crucial, is individualizing the macronutrients instead of demonizing them now.
Now, if there's one kind of pillar that, we talk about, what no matter what diet you're practicing, it's really blood sugar control, right? So can you just speak to blood sugar control, kind of what impacts that and why it's so critical?
Yeah, if you really kind of analyze these crazy things out there, these crazy diets, eating strategies, it really is like, in the end, most of it is trying to get to optimizing blood sugar and controlling the hormonal fluctuations based on blood sugar ebbs and flows. And, I remember back in the days, I don't even know what year this was, but if you remember the name Dr. Barry Sears, like he was on top of this with his whole 40-30-30 diet. I know Dede's like, oh yeah, right.
He was a big feature at Stanford. We worked with him when I was at Stanford.
Yeah, I remember that because he was an integral part of that, right? For sure. And that was like his whole thing. Like I remember as I was going through school and I got wind of him and I started reading some of his stuff, I'm like, because at the same time, like in grad school, I was learning more of the hormonal influence and the metabolism. I'm like, what he's saying is actually making sense scientifically. This may not be quackery. And like, I think that just kind of started everything. But if you do look at it, like at the end of the day, I'm not going to be particular into what an athlete should eat from the minutest level, right? It's just like, we need to put carbs, protein, and fat together to optimize blood sugar 90% of the time throughout the day, which we know has an optimal effect on body weight, body composition, cognitive health and functioning, proper development. So for our young athletes, and actually for us masters athletes, like as we develop into the next stage, like we know we need to control blood sugar, especially, dare I say this, when we actually get up there in age, 80, 90, whatever, we need to start thinking about cognitive decline and all these diseases that are related to inflammation. And literally blood sugar control is tied to so many inflammatory disease states that should be the focus of every single person when it comes to putting food in their mouth. Should not be a diet. It should be focusing on what carbohydrate, protein, and fat am I eating to elicit a good blood sugar response most of the time, right? Nobody's perfect. Obviously, we're all human.
And Bob, you were probably about 10 years ago now, one of the first people when I started working for UCAN that I got a chance to talk to about nutrition. And there's so many things over the years that you've said that have really just simplified this so much in terms of giving you a framework of how to think about blood sugar control. But I still just think back to like some of these simple strategies that you talk about when you're pairing food, like instead of eating the apple or the banana, have the apple or banana with some almond butter, right? Because that's balancing the macronutrients and helping you control blood sugar. So can you just kind of like, I think that stuff is so important because it's such like a moderate approach, what you're talking about. It's quite easy to actually adjust your way of thinking and not really be restricting, to a huge degree. So can you just kind of share like a simple framework for how to think about pairing foods?
Absolutely. And I think that's what people want at the end of the day. They don't know it. And even when I work with the most analytical OCD triathlete, because I've worked with those people before who want like the calories and the grams and everything. And you're like, you know what? It's really not about that, right? It's about looking at food. And just like you're saying, like most of the time we want a carbohydrate, a source of protein, and a source of fat. Because we know from a biochemical standpoint, those three nutrients will control blood sugar very well, right? Obviously, it depends on the quantities, but you always want to strive to have those with each other at the same time, right? So there's so many makeovers you can do. Like if you eat oatmeal in the morning, well, how about that's a could be a decent source of carbohydrate, a little bit of protein, but how do we sneak more protein in? Are you using milk? Are you putting some nuts in there? Like nut butter even? Like there's so many little, and they're not even hacks like you're saying, Varn. Like there's no elimination, there's no hacking, right? It's literally just like, and I this is how I teach athletes to go in the grocery store, right? We all, well, most of us shop, right? When you have a list of carbohydrates, which are fruits and veggies, and then whole grains. Then have a list of proteins, right? If you actually separate your shopping list, it actually makes controlling your blood sugar much easier. And I know that sounds really weird, but what ends up in your shopping cart ends up in your house. And then it's just a matter of, do you know how to cook and actually prepare some food, right? But that's usually the biggest challenge is I don't know what to buy. And if I don't buy the right things to control blood sugar, then I'm at home like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll just have a couple bananas or whatever.
To that end, Bob, I've actually been coached that when you go to the grocery store and you buy your carb sources, actually draw the line across the chart, right? Like,
Yes.
you know, when you're in the second grade and you're pairing,
Yeah,
the things,
yeah.
draw the line across the chart so that you're pairing what you're buying on the carbohydrate side with what you're going to pair it with on the protein side. So that when you do buy your oatmeal, you're buying the nuts or the nut butters or the what have you. Or if you're having, you know, a slice of toast, you know, make it an egg sandwich, put a scrambled egg on there with maybe a little bit of avocado, like to balance it out so that you're not only are you separating your list, but you're shopping in pairs.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea. And that's, I mean, that's worth its weight in gold right there.
And all of you guys are talking about such common and foundational foods that probably every athlete has, you know, eggs, fruit, with, you know, whole grains. Like it's so, I mean, it's really not complex. And I that's what I appreciate about having these, you know, having you on these, Bob, because I think it is, if people understand the framework, then it's actually not very difficult to implement.
Well, in Varn, there's two things that people are thinking about. One is they just simply lack the knowledge about food. And I totally get that. Like some of us don't grow up with a lot of that knowledge, but they seek it out. But two, they make it overcomplicated. And that's what we're trying to bring down a little bit, and don't overcomplicate food. We think about blood sugar, use these lists, do the pairing, do the lines in the grocery store. Like it actually needs to be simple, because simple is sustainable when it comes to blood sugar control and choosing foods.
Lauren, we heard about Dede's example, and Dede, I think that's a super intuitive way to kind of shop at the grocery store. Anything about
100% my nutritionist, I didn't come up with it. I am 100% coached on this. This has been my Achilles heel, both as a swimmer and throughout my entire professional triathlon career. I had to go elsewhere for help, so I can't take credit.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that knowledge with us. Lauren, what about this conversation and kind of this idea of balancing blood sugar? What resonates with you, and what's your approach to kind of day-to-day nutrition?
So it's funny, as you guys were all talking about the grocery list yesterday, I started ordering the groceries online. So I just go and pick it up at the store, because Dede and I are in heavy Ironman training and the hours are very limited to do other things besides training. So yesterday was my easier day. So I wrote out what I want for dinner each week. Like I did meal planning, and I mean, every meal is like, I eat a lot of potatoes and rice. And so it's always a potatoes and rice. It's a type of protein, and then usually vegetables along with it. So I wrote everything out, and then I do oatmeal every morning with like fruit. But what I started doing during these big training blocks is I use the UCAN protein and energy and add that to my oatmeal in the morning. You guys suggested that to me at UCAN. And so that's been great, especially, you know, during these heavy blocks when we do need extra calories, and it's really I mean, it's hard to stay on top of the calories when, today I had like 4 workouts back to back to back. And so this morning I'm packing for an entire day. I had like my oatmeal here, but then I'm packing a lunch, I'm packing another meal for after all the workouts. I'm doing snacks, like, it's can sometimes, I think it feels like a lot of work maybe, or people think it's going to be a lot of work, but it's really not, especially once you get into a routine and you have those staple foods, like, you make quick rice that is quick and easy. Like I buy already cooked chicken sausages. So literally you heat it up for 30 seconds. Like I try and do really easy stuff, but still be able to get in the balanced meals and the calories that I need.
Great.
Barney, can I say something real quick?
Please.
The listeners will love this, because I think the listeners look at, well, I know the listeners because I work with these, a lot of recreational athletes, triathletes, and they look at professionals like Dede and Lauren. They're like, of course they eat well. Like they've got all this time because all they're doing is training. Like that's the farthest thing from the truth, right? I mean, if you guys understood what Dede and Lauren do throughout the day, and if you guys were picking up on it from what Lauren was saying, it's simple, it's easy, it's quick. Like and Dede and Lauren, please correct me if I'm wrong, but recreational athletes, triathletes just think, oh, you guys have all day long to do food prep. And it's just not the truth.
No, it's absolutely not. And that's part of the reason why I really struggled with nutrition. And I literally have worked with, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but 118 different nutritionists over the course of my career, because one of them was great and gave me a shopping list and a menu and really spelled it out for me. I didn't have to do any thinking, but she expected me to cook my lunch. And I was like, what? I was like, no. And so one of the things that's been super helpful for me, and as Lauren said, making it simple is what makes it sustainable. Again, I always shied away from sort of pre-packaged things, but for the simplicity of it, I use that a lot. But I just learning, as I said, to pair it with something that's going to make it better. So what I was doing wasn't necessarily off. It wasn't enough, but learning to then pair it. And again, where UCAN comes in is when we have these days, we call them Terrible Tuesdays, where we are literally back to back to back to back to back. Sometimes you don't have time for a full meal, right? So immediately after a session, when you know your next hard session is coming in an hour, right? Having the UCAN protein is great because you're getting some protein in post-workout, but you're also getting the super starch in there that's going to be with you into the next workout. So some of the UCAN products have been super helpful. I want to say not only in going out and fueling an epic training day, but getting me through these really busy days when I don't have time to cook 16 meals. It's a great snack. It's a great filler. It's a great buffer. It's adding calories that not only are going to help you refuel from your previous workout, but also lay the foundation for the one that's coming in 20 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great example too, because that's so transferable to somebody that may be, working a job and then trying to fuel up before working out, right? Like that example you gave can be sort of applied to so many people's, whatever their busy day looks like, relative to what your busy day looks like. So that's a really good example. And I really like this conversation about kind of setting the background with blood sugar, because as we kind of move into talking a little bit more specifically about UCAN and how you guys use it, I mean, that really is what fundamentally makes UCAN different from so much of the other sugar-based sports nutrition out there. And Bob, when we approached you at UCAN, over 10 years ago now, that's really what intrigued you, right? You were looking for something from a sports nutrition standpoint that kind of fit your philosophy around fueling, which was centered around keeping blood sugar stable, and you weren't really finding something that could do that as effectively as you wanted with what existed out there. So I'll let you kind of take the story from there, but can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, this was truly old school. So this was 2005 when I was at University of Florida and leading that program. And this was truly the old school back then, right? And I remember, like, as a sport dietitian, especially at a university that big, I would get calls every week from product companies, I mean, you name it. Oh, we've got the next best thing, right? And I remember Peter at UCAN gave me a call. He found me, and I just remember this. He's like, "Hey, I've got this product." I'm like, "Oh, here we go again," right? And but here's the thing, like, and I forgot the exact conversation, but we were talking about blood sugar control because again, that's my thing. That's my philosophy. And then he looped it into this new product, UCAN, which it was not UCAN back then, by the way. And that's what got my attention. I was like, oh, wait a second. He's talking my language. He's maybe developing a product, because this is when UCAN was trying to kind of treading water and seeing if they should even kind of introduce into the sport nutrition field, because they hadn't planned on that. And so I remember leaving that and I said, listen, this sounds great. When you have some research, show me and we'll talk again. Because literally 80% of the time that works, I'll never hear from that person again because they're not going to do the research, right? And in my trade, that's very important to look at it to be able to springboard the next conversation. So I remember I had then left Florida and I went to the US Olympic Committee here in Colorado again. And I think he tracked me down again, right? And he's like, okay, we have a research study. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You're kind of putting your, where your what is. And I looked it over and it was a pilot study, low sample size, but the fact that they actually, UCAN actually stepped up to do that, to see that held a lot of clout, and I respected him quite a lot after he positioned that. So that's when the whole relationship started. Because I remember, like, I was in the early days of doing some beta testing, and I would be doing some trail running in Colorado. I'd have a blood sugar meter with me. I'd stop and I'd prick my finger. I'd take the plain UCAN, because there were no flavors back then. Like, it was just plain super starch, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is actually doing what he said it's doing. And I would try it during the day, like snacks, like Dede was saying, just throughout the day. And I was sticking my finger and I'm like, whoa, okay, so it's working real life. They've got research to support it. That was where, obviously, Varn, this is the only product that I have ever supported because it integrates with my nutrition philosophy working with athletes.
Absolutely. And I just want to share my screen for a moment, Bob, to build a little bit on what you were talking about. So with UCAN, what really kind of sets it apart is, again, like we've been talking about, this idea of blood sugar stabilization and the super starch, which you heard Lauren and Bob both allude to. That's the carbohydrate in UCAN. So UCAN is a carbohydrate-based energy product. It's giving you carbohydrates, but the really unique thing about our carbohydrate is, because of the way it's cooked, we've patented a cooking process that we apply to starch. The energy and the calories are delivered at a very time-released and steady rate. So, with the traditional sugar-based fueling, the left side, you see the old paradigm, it's all about quick energy, right? You're taking something sugary, you're feeling it, and then you have to ride that wave every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes. With UCAN, the idea is that you take it once and it's distributing and breaking down a lot more evenly over, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, kind of depending on how much you take in. So for athletes, they're feeling both a lot steadier and there's less work. Bob, I remember we used to have this on one of the first banners we ever printed, that it was your quote. It said, UCAN takes the worries out of racing, right? Because it's like you're just focused on your race. You're not really thinking about every 15, 20 minutes, I have to take some nutrition. And I'll just quickly share, the backstory to all this, because this is really what, for me on a personal level, got me so fascinated with UCAN, and was just the story behind why the company and why the carbohydrate was developed. So our founder's son, Jonah, he suffered from a very rare blood sugar disease where he had to be fed every 2 hours to sustain his energy. He wasn't able to break down and process traditional carbohydrates and convert them to glucose. So his parents were waking up 4 to 5 times in the middle of the night to feed him, just to help him maintain his energy. And these kids were just taking regular Argo cornstarch. They were able to metabolize that for a short period of time. It was able to sustain their blood sugar. So his family started a foundation and they spearheaded all this research, which ultimately led to this cooking technology that just involves heat, pressure, and water over a prolonged period of time. So we apply it to starch, and that causes it to break down a lot slower. The first people that were taking this were Jonah and other kids with this condition, and they were able to take it in prior to sleeping at night, and it was giving them 8 hours of stable blood sugar. So this was like truly, truly amazing for his family. They went to waking up, setting multiple alarm clocks, waking up 4 to 5 times in the middle of the night, literally to feed their son so he didn't potentially, have something catastrophic happen, to being able to sleep through the night. And then at that point, this idea of sustaining blood sugar for a long period of time, the thought process started to go towards what would happen if active individuals and athletes took it. And that's where people like Bob came in. We kind of pressure tested this idea with credible people in sports nutrition to understand, do we even have anything here from an idea standpoint? Like, is this even a desired effect for a sports dietitian to have this stable source of energy? And then when the idea was validated, like Bob shared, we put some research behind it, and ultimately found that the UCAN products with this super starch carbohydrate in it provided a much steadier and longer sustained bout of energy than your sugar and maltodextrin based fuels. And Bob, you were talking about the CGM in the early days. I mean, even more recently, you did some self-experimentation, right? Where you kind of followed a UCAN fueling protocol, wore the blood sugar monitor, and then followed a more traditional sugar-based protocol with Morton and GU. And you want to just share kind of anecdotally what you learned via that study?
It was pretty cool. So I got my hands on the CGM for a month last year, and I tried out different products, and I just followed the manufacturer guidelines, right? So I used UCAN energy powder, and I used UCAN Edge, right? The new non-gel gel, right? I use like simple sugar based. I use GU. There we go. I use GU. I use Morton. I used Scratch. Super fuel. So I just wanted to put everything to the test. And obviously, we need to consider it is N of 1, right? Let's consider that. But what I was finding with all the non-UCAN products is I had to dose quite often. Their manufacturing guidelines were pretty spot on, every 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30, depending. But I found some really significant crashes during bike rides and during longer runs. And it was kind of scary, to be honest with you. Like, some of the products really caused me to crash, and like I felt it. And then I'd, stop and get my phone up to my CGM, and I'd look at them like, oh my God, I'm totally crashing, right? So it kind of solidified for me obviously we've known this, but actually wearing a CGM and putting different products to the test, from a simple sugar-based, even other technological sport nutrition products, right, against UCAN. Can I say this? UCAN's a real deal. Like, it does keep energy stable. Get a CGM, wear it for a couple months, and you'll prove to yourself how beneficial it actually is in optimizing and controlling your blood sugar, both throughout the day and during training.
It's really, really valuable to have the CGM data. We had 10 of our ambassadors kind of follow a similar experiment, and we're working on putting some of that data together. Just, again, very data driven. Just, this is what they experienced with their blood sugar, and it's super fascinating. Dede and Lauren, I want to get a little bit into kind of what you guys are doing specifically with UCAN, kind of how you think about UCAN, maybe relative to when you were doing something more traditional sugar-based approach. And what I mean by that is, for some people, the UCAN, it's kind of like the benefit of is the less is more aspect of it, where they're like, hey, I don't seem to be able to need to take in as much of this. But for other people, and Lauren, I'm kind of teasing your experience, the benefit with UCAN is like, hey, I can actually take in a lot of this, and it's not bothering my stomach the way the sugary stuff used to. So it's kind of fascinating that for different athletes, and kind of different people's metabolic needs, that can work differently. But I'd say that the two core benefits of UCAN are the stable energy that we've been talking about, kind of what we saw in the chart with the blood sugar, and then how easy it is on athletes' stomachs. And, there is science behind that as well, because of how complex and large the super starch is, it exits the stomach really quickly. It doesn't need to be chased with as much water like sugary sports fuels do. So it's literally not sitting in your stomach, and it's not there to bother it in the same way that sugars are. But Lauren, let's start with you. Kind of, how did you come to UCAN? Like, what intrigued you about giving it a shot? And let's talk about maybe for training and racing, like, what's kind of an overall protocol? If you have a big session, how are you going to fuel with the different UCAN products?
Yeah, so I'll start off with kind of why I started using UCAN. I got shingles, it was a year and a half ago. And it was after this like bike trip where we were riding our bike a ton. We weren't sleeping much. And I was eating so much crap, like just gels and blocks and like gas station food and Cokes and just so much crap. And, I felt awful the whole trip, and then really took a turn for the worse, got shingles. I mean, I'm not saying why I got shingles, I don't know, but I'm not a doctor, but it really made me, for some reason, like search and do research and figure out like a new fueling plan. Like, what do I need to be doing? Like, how can I be feeling my best? Because I was just at my worst for a couple of weeks, and it just made me realize, like, okay, I need to like completely start over with my nutrition. Like, let's decide what I need to do and go from there. And so I had obviously known about UCAN. Like, I had teammates that used UCAN, and reading the story really got me intrigued. And I was like, okay, it helped their kid with his disorder, and I was like, okay, like maybe it'll help my fueling, because I always seem to be having so many random problems in life. And so I reached out, and I've been using it for a year and a half now. And it really, like, I was just talking to my dad earlier, and I've been doing my biggest training weeks the past like couple months now that I've ever been able to do. And, I mean, it's amazing. Like, my body is just feeling good. And I think a huge part of that is because of how I'm fueling. And so today I was thinking, this is just coming on such a great day, because it was terrible Tuesday. So I had a bike, a run, a swim, and strength session. And for me, I now live kind of outside of town. So I have to drive down our mountain, go to town, and I do everything back to back to back to back. So I'm gone all day long. And so my day started out, I'm at home, had oatmeal with the protein and energy, like a scoop of that. And then driving, I 40 minutes to go ride my bike, and just sipping on the UCAN electrolytes on the way down. And then, starting with my bike ride, I had a scoop of UCAN with electrolytes. And then like heading back to the gym so I can do my run, swim, strength. So after my bike ride, I had a scoop of the protein, and then I had a fig bar. I'm like, okay, what else can I have? I need a little bit more than the 100 calories. And so I had UCAN protein, a fig bar. And then, during my run, I'm having more UCAN energy and electrolytes, and it just keeps going. And then at the end of all those sessions, have another protein shake, and then some more, more regular food at the end of that. But so, I mean, it really, like, it is fueling me all day and getting me through like these 5 hours of back to back to back sessions. But here I am, like, we tease Dede, but like, we do go to sleep early because we're so tired from training all day. But like, I still feel good. And I mean, these are no nap days. Like, I would do one session and need to take a nap because I just felt so awful. And so I have found that for me, fueling more has been important. Like, even if I'm doing a 90-minute bike, like I'm having, like, maybe it's just one scoop of the UCAN starch, but so it's 100 calories, but like, it's something. And it is just keeping me going for that hour and a half, but then also continuing to make me feel good so that I'm getting ready for my next session. So yeah, this conversation just came on such a good day, because I'm like, I have my huge bag of UCAN stuff in my car, and I just like keep adding it to all my water bottles.
Like, you open your car door and the UCAN shaker bottles kind of fall out into the parking lot.
I know.
Like, your UCAN shaker bottles go to die.
I just have like stuff everywhere for the day, but yeah. So it's helping me get through these huge days. And, my training, I've never been able to do these huge back-to-back weeks. So I can't be happier in what UCAN has helped me do these past couple months. Yeah.
And Lauren, I mean, there's so much gold in what you've been saying today, but I think what I like to hear you talk about is, so many times I think in triathletes and endurance athletes might get caught up in how do I fuel the big workout, but you're talking about, kind of fueling on a day-to-day basis and the impact that that's having for you. And I think that's super important, right? And especially when you're fueling with something that isn't sugar-based. Like, sure, if you're fueling with something that's sugar-based, maybe you're saying, I don't want to take that every day before a 90-minute session, but with something like UCAN, you can give your body kind of the fuel it needs and that it desires to, sustain you through these workouts and not feel kind of bad about that. So really, yeah, I appreciate that. And one thing I just wanted to kind of have you elaborate on. So is your general framework, did you think about it this way at all? Like, are you generally saying, I'm going to start with a baseline of 100 calories of UCAN per hour? Kind of, you were talking about a scoop per hour, and then you might be supplementing with a few things here or there. And if that is the case, does that get adjusted up when you're racing?
Yeah, so right now, like today, all of my workouts were pretty short. And so I was having, like, during my hour run, I had one scoop. Yeah, I had 100 calories. And, same with the 90-minute bike and same with the swim. But like tomorrow, I have a 5-hour bike with a runoff. And so tomorrow, I'm going to be doing more race nutrition. And for me, we talked about a lot of people use less calories because they don't feel like they need it. The large amount of calories with starting or using UCAN, but like for me, I'll take 250 to 300 calories an hour tomorrow, just because I don't just have that workout, right? Like the next day, like we have big weeks right now. And so we need to make sure like we're not under fueling at all during these sessions. And so I'll be having probably 200 calories of UCAN per hour, but then, I will have like, I don't know, like a boba bar, or, some extra stuff, just so that when I'm sitting on the trainer for 5 hours, I do have some actual food that I'm eating, make me feel a little bit better. But yeah, so when I'm racing, you asked about racing, I am usually, I would say 250 calories an hour of UCAN. Yeah.
And for you, the UCAN product that you're most commonly using during training is the UCAN energy powder. Is that the one you're using?
Using the energy powder, and then and even during races I just use the energy powder, and then I found like at a really cold race I did need some extra calories, so I was picking up some extra stuff on course if I needed it. I put a bunch of calories in a couple bottles, and I found that I can get about 600 calories of the energy powder scoops, and it doesn't coagulate, like it's still good. You can drink it. So I can do that in 2 separate bottles, and I can get enough like for my Ironman bike ride.
Very good. Super insightful. Dede, similar question for you. What does a day of training fueled by UCAN look like for you, and how different or similar is that to what you do in your races?
Yeah, I mean, I came to UCAN actually after my Ultraman experience. I thought I had a pretty good fueling plan for my Ironman racing and for Ultraman, although Ultraman veterans had said, you're absolutely crazy, you're not going to make it. I did all liquid nutrition because I have a sensitive stomach, and so I never took any solids in my Ironman racing. It was all liquid nutrition, and I somehow thought that through Ultraman, well, I'll just do that 3 days in a row and it'll be great. And it was for day one. I got through day one, absolutely no problem. I was using a sport drink. It was a blend of carbohydrates, but it was all sugar. And day one was great. And I got up on day two and started the 171-mile bike ride. And 15 miles into my 171-mile bike ride, I was putting this super high glycemic sugary drink in my mouth, and it was coming right back up. Just started throwing up immediately. My body was literally rejecting the amount of sugar that I was putting in. And this sort of speaks to my day-to-day fueling as well, because when I get too much sugar, it just doesn't sit well in my stomach. And my solution was always, okay, well, I'm just not going to fuel. And I got really good at going through 3, 4, even 5-hour workouts on like 200 calories total, because anytime I put the sugar in, it would upset my stomach. So I just got really efficient with not fueling. But of course, then I got injured, and I spent a series of years with these injuries. And a doctor finally said to me, like, Dede, your body's eating itself to stay alive. Like, you need to figure this out on multiple levels, not only the day-to-day fueling, but your race fueling as well. But simply not eating is not the solution. So with Ultraman and starting to get really sick, I mean, my crew was amazing, and they really triaged and started feeding me all of these other things. And it was afterwards that one of my crew said, you just looked at me like we went back to our accommodation after night 3 and we had ordered some pizza. And he's like, you need to call UCAN. And so it was about a couple of weeks later, I picked up the phone and I reached out and I said, here's my situation. It's not working for me. What I'm doing isn't working. I think for a single day event, I found I could sort of get away with it, but even then it was somewhat unreliable. So I started using the UCAN, and I was really almost fortunate that I had the entire pandemic to sort of play with it in my training and find out what works. Not entirely dissimilar to Lauren. For shorter sessions, I find I can get by. If I just have an hour bike session, I'll just take a scoop of the hydrate, right? If I've had a meal before, I'm fueled. I don't need calories for an hour bike session. I'll just have a scoop of the hydrate and be on my merry way. And that's pretty much the case for any bike workout at less than 90 minutes. If I'm going 2 hours to 3 hours, I'll have a couple of scoops of UCAN. When I get into the super long blocks, like I have Lauren's day actually on Saturday is my exact day because I'm coming off a race. So my longer fueled sessions will always start with UCAN with breakfast, just to lay that foundation. And I will start sipping on UCAN almost from the time I get up with breakfast up until the start of the workout. And then for say a 5-hour ride, my first 2 bottles will be UCAN. And then later into the ride, I will start to layer some higher glycemic carbs on top of that, usually in the form of, I use the Morton gels, but I find I don't need as many of them because the UCAN is working underneath in the background. The gels also provide a way for me because UCAN doesn't yet have caffeine. And I do dose caffeine for longer sessions. I feel it's a performance enhancer, a legal one. And so I'm able to get some of the caffeine through the gels, but I find I don't need as many of the gels because of the UCAN. So it's a balancing act. I find that, in my training, it has enabled me to fuel more because I'm not, putting sugar down my gut the whole time. So my stomach is appreciating it. So it's enabled me to fuel more, even on the shorter sessions, and on the longer sessions, it lays the foundation so that my stomach is happy, so that later on in the session, if I do add some higher glycemic carbs, the UCAN is still always there and I don't need as many of them for a little bit of a boost later in a longer session.
And for you, Dede, the UCAN that you're kind of sipping on in the morning, is that the UCAN energy, or are you using the energy plus protein when you start in the morning, kind of sipping on the UCAN?
I'm using the energy plus the hydrate, and I will highly recommend anybody out there, the orange with the new pineapple hydrate is like this tropical dream come true. It makes you smile.
Amazing.
The pineapple with the orange energy is like, I would actually drink it as just an evening cocktail because it tastes so good.
I'm especially laughing, and Bob, you must be laughing because if you've been around UCAN as long as you have, you know that somebody saying they would drink UCAN as an evening cocktail is not always the case. So
taste for UCAN hasn't been a strong marketing tool. I will warn people that ask me, they're like, what about, like, I've heard it's super chalky, it's really hard to mix. Yeah, you can't put 12 scoops of UCAN into a bottle the way you can with sugar, right? So you need to be more careful. You need to mix it a little bit differently. But I've also found that mixing the energy with the hydrate actually changes the texture of the energy a little bit, making it a lot more, at least for me, palatable, and it blends the tastes a little bit and it mixes it up. I find it to be delightful, and I'll be honest, having used it now for, a couple of years, I actually find the UCAN preferable to a really sugary sport drink. Like, I cannot take a sugary sport drink anymore. I just can't. The texture of it, it's too syrupy. I find I'm actually craving the UCAN, which is weird.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. Yeah, I feel the same way. And some days I'm like, am I just convincing myself of this, or is this really happening? Yeah, it's like the thought of even putting a Gatorade to my lips anymore. It's like I couldn't even imagine it.
It's poison. Yeah, it's terrible.
Bob, I wanted to, and guys, we are running a little bit over, so we'll just spend about another 5 to 10 minutes here. I know you guys are, I'm keeping you guys up way too late. But Bob, what about what Dede and Lauren said kind of, did you have any thoughts or comments on anything they said? And then what I wanted to just have you help establish us with is like, what's a framework you use for UCAN fueling with your athletes? Is there kind of this is how you can get started and then you can adjust up or down from here?
I think the interesting thing that I like to remind even recreationally competitive, like maybe top 3 in their age group or whatever, I like to remind them that the level of competitiveness changes how you're actually utilizing calories during training and during racing, right? So if you look at Dede and Lauren, this is the way I look at it. Their engine is running hot, much hotter than ours runs as recreational triathletes. Again, they need, honestly, when you kind of talk about the introduction to maybe some other simple sugars because their furnace is running so hot, they're going through so many calories relative to what age group, recreational triathletes do. So that's the main difference. So, I think a lot of times in the early phases of UCAN working with professional triathletes, everyone was like, oh my gosh, they're still doing simple sugars. That's no. The need is very different from recreational to highly competitive elite. So that's one thing to kind of take away as a recreational triathlete or endurance athlete for that matter. The other thing I'll say in introducing UCAN into a strategy, it's super easy. Like if you're going to tell me, hey, we're going to introduce this simple sugar gel or simple sugar sport drink, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to say, okay, now we have to be very careful. We have to dose very low because it can trigger GI distress. But with UCAN, literally you can just jump in the pool, both feet, and not worry about it. So I obviously, as a sport dietitian, I look at the dietary protocol that they're following, daily nutrition first, right? To make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but it is so simple. What I usually do, if we're talking about, again, we have to qualify the product, Warren, as you know, but if we're just talking about the energy powder, I start usually just with 2 scoops an hour. And I determine how that athlete does in their performance. If they track markers, quantitative markers, qualitative markers, like how they felt, how they recover for the next day. So I start at 2 scoops and then we kind of adjust it based on their need. Some athletes, I actually do the energy and protein for my longer distance, my ultra athletes. I'll do that during. The edge is like game changer, lifesaver. Let me just tell you, I think, if we could just make a big bottle of edge, and have that available, because it's taken a lot of the concern of how do I carry UCAN. As we know, is if we do long course triathlon, it's a huge concern. I work with a lot of age groupers who are like, I don't know, they use UCAN, but they're like, I don't know, do I just dump it all in my special needs bag? How do I carry this, right? So luckily we have the Edge now, which is, like I said, total game changer. But, I think, in general, 2 scoops of energy powder per hour, 2 edges per hour, I think is a really good place to start. And then you titrate up or down based on needs. And I will say this too, and some of the listeners may have really, listen to what Dede and Lauren were saying, but they didn't really allude to the intensity of sessions, right? So based on the intensity of sessions, and I picked it up, right? Because I've been around the block for a couple of times, but depending on the intensity of sessions, you may need more UCAN or more calories. And that's exactly, Lauren, what you were saying is, and your body's built that way too, but your furnace is running hotter. Maybe your intensity, maybe you're in that zone 3, zone 4 and above, or maybe some shorter efforts. And remember, guys and girls, Dede and Lauren's race pace is much different than ours, right? So they need more calories per hour. And I think that's what's really crucial, is to determine the overall quantity. So even though we have research that says, yeah, we should consume between 120 and 360 calories an hour, that's 30 to 90 grams of carbs per hour, it's not specific for each individual. So I kind of start on that low to moderate end, just to be careful, and then we go up or down based on that.
It's a smart, you obviously know what you're doing, so I don't need to say this to you, because I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff that needs a nutritionist like you to help me. Yeah. But I have worked with nutritionists in the past who have flipped that on its head and said, let's cram 500 calories an hour down your throat. Right. Oh, you threw up? Okay, let's take it down to 450. And they work backwards. Right. I think it's much easier to work up, to say, okay, you feel great at 150. Can we get you to 175 without causing GI distress? Okay, now let's train it there for a little while. Now can we get you up to 200? And for me, that's been the great thing about UCAN, is that I have been able to increase the number of calories per hour I can take in because it's settling so well in my stomach, and it's not this heavy, sugary, syrupy stuff that's just sitting there like a bowling ball.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst thing is to throw, I mean, vomiting is horrible. And I would question anyone that recommends that higher in the beginning, at least, right? I mean, that's just been there, done that, and it's not fun. Like, nobody wants to go through that.
Puke and rally.
Pushing the reset button, right? That's what we used to call it.
Bob, I'm going to fire some quick hit questions at you before we wrap this up. There's just a few. So one thing I wanted to ask you, do you view the UCAN Edge, which is, you know, for lack of a better word, the UCAN gel, do you view that as being interchangeable with the UCAN energy powder?
I actually do. Like, it's got 15 grams of super starch versus 20 versus a scoop with the energy powder, but it's extremely interchangeable. I actually love going that way first, because I find that, you know, and Dede, you were mentioning this too, and even Lauren, where if an athlete is kind of coming from the simple sugar route, like products, I think the Edge is a really great introduction into UCAN, because you don't get as much of the starch. At least my palate doesn't pick up as much of that, right? So I absolutely love the Edge, and that's like my go-to first to get someone introduced to UCAN. Obviously for the portability too. I think it's super, super easy.
The energy plus protein, you talked about some of your ultra athletes utilizing it during. Is any thoughts about a triathlete utilizing the energy plus protein on the bike compared to the energy?
You know, I think you have to have the discussion of, if they're doing Ironman, like the full distance, maybe we can loop that into the conversation, but then it comes down to the, like, how long you're going to be on the course, right? And how long you're going to be on the bike, specifically in the run. What are the environmental conditions? Because I mean, I don't think anyone wants to do any type of protein in Kona. It just would not sit well with those environmental conditions, but maybe a cooler race, and maybe for an athlete who may be out there for a few more hours, maybe that protein could be beneficial. I don't often find it in Ironman. It would have to take like more of the Ultraman or some ultra runs, like 100-mile runs and stuff. I'm not saying it wouldn't fit. It just would take that special person with that special digestive tract.
Bob, does the physiology, because this is a question I get from my coached athletes, does the physiology of the athlete, and I'm just stereotyping because I have a tremendously high muscle mass, but would a bigger male with a higher muscle mass require more protein versus a smaller female with lower muscle mass? Is that a thing? Because people ask me that all the time. I'm a really big, strong guy. I have all this muscle. I need the protein because I'm breaking down.
Yeah. During the day, yes. So daily nutrition, but during exercise, we're not going to tap into our muscle protein stores, our amino acids, until probably around hour 4, 5, or 6. So that's where you could make the case for long course. But oftentimes, like, this my only hesitation is sometimes the gut is so sensitive because we're exercising, right? That I don't even want to introduce protein, and certainly not fat, because that will again disrupt that digestive response.
Bob, from a health marker standpoint, are there a list of biomarkers that you recommend athletes track?
Yeah, boy, where do I start and where do I end, right? I mean, there are so many. I would say there are a few that everyone should be interested in. Those obviously blood sugar, blood insulin, full blood lipid panel, iron, B12 if you're vegan or not vegan. Magnesium is popping up quite a bit these days, testosterone. Females now are testing their estrogen and progesterone, especially when they're in premenopause, just to kind of see those fluctuations. So when they enter perimenopause and postmenopause, they have some baseline. I will say this. It's much more than a normal physician visit where they just give you a CBC and maybe a basic blood lipid test. You need, like, athletes, and especially as we're aging, and I would say anywhere 30 and above, really need to start paying attention to some of the markers that I was mentioning, because things change. And especially as endurance athletes, like, you know, levels of iron, vitamin D will actually fluctuate throughout the year, especially if you're female versus male. But we know some biomarkers are very sensitive to endurance exercise and also sensitive to dietary changes. And that's what we want to try to catch throughout the year based on the training cycle. So I mean, you didn't ask this question, but I usually recommend biomarker testing at least twice a year to try to catch those differences between base training and maybe off season, to kind of note the differences, to kind of build on the next year to see nutritionally what they need to change for that upcoming year. Because remember, everyone, we are getting older, and as we get older, unfortunately, some of our body systems are less efficient as we get older, right? I'm not going to say it's obviously inevitable, but it will definitely become less efficient at certain ages as we develop into our endurance endurance career.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. We had a question about cooking superstarch, and our understanding of it is, like, people are able to add it to oatmeals and other hot foods and things of that, and still have an efficacious effect from it. In terms of baking with it, we sort of say we don't know, just that we don't know what'll happen if you bake it at really, really, really high temperatures. So that's generally what I'd say. Like, if you're adding it to something that's already warm, or even if you're adding it to something that's boiling, like, should be fine. I know, Pam Rickard and Linda, they used to do the hot, the chocolate UCAN with hot water when they were doing their races in the desert, right? To get that, like, UCAN hot chocolate feeling. But yeah, any thoughts from your end about cooking superstarch or heating it?
I mean, I wouldn't put it in a saucepan. It's not going to turn out too well in that. I've baked with it quite a bit in muffins and cookies and stuff, my special Bob cookies. And it turns out fine. It's kind of like, I mean, it depends on if you're using the energy powder or protein. I always would use the energy powder with protein because I want that extra protein. And it kind of reacts similar to a protein powder if you bake with it. So it makes it a little more dry. So you have to kind of play with the other moisture compounds in the recipe. But I mean, it's probably not, it's not the best thing to do, but you can certainly do it. Like in all my baking, adventures, it's never hurt my recipe. Sometimes it doesn't make it taste good because it dries it out.
Cool. I'm going to pose one last one to the group, and then we're going to wrap this up for the night. Just in terms of carrying UCAN and the UCAN energy, Dede and Lauren, any suggestions on specific bottles, or like, how do you do it so it works well, just with the consistency of UCAN?
Yeah, I pre-mix it in a shaker bottle. So I don't put it straight into the water bottle. I put some water in, then I put the UCAN scoops and mix it in concentrate, and then add more water, mix it in the shaker bottle, and then dump it into a water bottle. And then I'll have multiple cages on my bike, and then also utilize special needs.
Lauren, any secret strategy that you've come up with?
Yeah, same. I think the shaker bottle is a great way just to, make sure it's all mixed up. And like I said, I've been able to get about like 600-700 calories of it in a regular bottle, and it's fine. And so for me, I have a regular bottle between my arms on the bike. And so when I, pop up the bottle, I can shake it a little bit and then drink it. So yeah, that seems to work well. And then on the run, I have one of like the little 5-ounce flasks, and I add a little bit of water. I add some scoops of UCAN, and then I run with that. And for the second part of the marathon, I'll grab my special needs and the calories I need for the second half. So those little 5-ounce sipper bottles, work great for me.
It's actually easy when you run because you're constantly shaking it.
This last one just came in, which I think is something that we get a lot. So I promise we'll wrap up on this. But Bob, we've kind of historically, when we talked about UCAN in the early years, we used to kind of talk about dosing with it, kind of taking in a substantial amount at once, and then the carbohydrate slowly releases. Different people over the years have employed it differently. Some have sipped on it more slowly. Like, as you've worked with different athletes, used it in different ways yourself, have your thinking evolved on like how you should actually administer UCAN, for lack of a better terms, for the best effect? Or is it truly just like whatever works for the individual?
It is fairly N of one, but it kind of depends. Like if we're talking about triathletes, we're talking about how we're carrying it, right? Which is always poses a problem. I think I mean, before the Edge hit the market, obviously Varna was like, okay, every 60 to maybe 75 minutes, you're having 2 to 4 scoops, depending on the athlete, the intensity of the session, the duration, as long as they're pre-fed, they have a little meal or snack beforehand. It was easy peasy, right? And then within that hour, 75 minutes, they're sipping on it. I think that's a really great way, because if we're talking about energy powder mixed in water, you are satisfying some of your hydration needs and your electrolyte needs in that bottle. But now that the Edge has come out, it's kind of thrown me for a little loop. I mean, I've been experimenting with it too. And, I'm taking a few per hour, I'm dosing differently, and just to kind of see the reaction that my body has. I personally think, and this is probably going to cause some serious inventory issues for UCAN, but I think we're going to start seeing, especially long course triathletes, start to take the UCAN or the Edge packets, rip them open, squeeze them into a bottle, and literally, just like Lauren was saying, probably trying to get 5 to 6 of those, 7, 8 of those in a bottle. And that's going to be in their bottle. Like, I think it's going to start competing with the UCAN energy powder, to be honest with you.
So, hey, that's a pretty good idea. So you kind of, you think it's really ultimately what works for the individual athlete, whether they want to dose, with all of it in a short time frame and then kind of wait whatever that long period of time is.
I would just say, we do have to be careful, because the gastric emptying, so the gut emptying rate is, if you, and there's been done like some research on this, if you increase the bolus or if you drink a lot, it's going to, empty your stomach. But it has to be like a certain osmolality, certain concentration. If you do water, it's just going to sit there and it's going to slosh. So I usually don't recommend just slamming a bottle every, at 59 minutes kind of a thing. I really like titrating it throughout. Now, obviously, if you're on the bike, if you don't have access, you're in the aero position and you don't feel comfortable grabbing or whatever. I mean, I totally get that, but I believe it should be dosed like throughout that 60 to 75 minutes, whether it's in thirds or halves or whatever. I just feel that that's more successful, and try to finish instead of finishing a whole bottle at, like I said, 59 to 60 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Lauren or Dede, anything to add to that in terms of how you guys consume it? Or
I'm over time. I don't slam anything.
No.
Well, some things.
Well,
that would be the orange UCAN energy powder with pineapple hydrate.
That's right.
On a Friday night.
Well, guys, this has been amazing. This has been one of my favorite sessions to date. It's been amazing to just get all of your input, kind of the real world way that you guys are using UCAN. Bob, really amazing to have your perspective to kind of talk through the differences between, what Dede and Lauren might need, but also really cool to see similarities too, in terms of what you guys talked about and how relatable it is to kind of the training dilemmas that many people in the audience may face. So let me just go around and give you guys each a final word, and please feel free to plug anything you're involved with, tell people how they can follow your journey. Lauren, we'll start with you.
No, just thank you. That was a great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot from Bob, and tomorrow I'm going to be putting a bunch of the Edge in a bottle, and I'm going to see how my body reacts to that.
Awesome.
I just haven't using the Edge much. So
you let me know, Lauren, because I have that session on Saturday.
Perfect. But yeah, Instagram's the best place to follow me, Lauren B. Brandon. Yeah, I'm doing Oceanside in a couple weeks, and then Dede and I have Ironman Texas.
Amazing. And we didn't even mention that you guys are teammates. So this is like this is just another day for you guys, right? You guys
let me live
train
with
together, talk nutrition, UCAN together. That's awesome. Dede, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram as well. It bounces to Facebook, but I'm on both. I don't do much on my professional Facebook page. I should probably just delete that. But yeah, on both places. I'm Dede Griesbauer. It's Griesbauer. And I'm just so appreciative for UCAN, because it really has helped me a tremendous amount in my fueling, which needed some help.
Well, Dede, you're an amazing athlete, so we're happy to even be a little part of your story. But yeah, really excited to see what's ahead for you. Bob, really valuable to have you here. Thanks so much. How can people keep learning from you and dive deeper into some of the things you were talking about?
Oh yeah, I think you can find me just about everywhere, at least on the internet. I might point you to my nutrition coaching and physiological testing company, Energy Performance, so ENRG Performance here in Colorado. And also just a shout out to the podcast that I do with a great friend and colleague of mine, Dina Griffin. So we just started this Inside Sports Nutrition podcast, which you can find on all podcast platforms. But it's kind of the real life sport nutrition. We interview some great people. Lauren and Dede, you might be getting a contact from me here soon. But really kind of bringing sport nutrition and trying to bring it kind of down to the basic, simple, sustainable for people. So those are two easy ways to catch me.
Fantastic, guys. Well, this was a real thrill. Thank you guys so much for being part of this. For everybody who was able to attend, we really appreciate your questions, your comments. I know we got comments from people saying this is really valuable what you guys have to say. So yeah, really appreciate it. Everybody will get a recording of this tomorrow. So stay tuned, bookmark it. You guys can refer back to this. Lauren and Dede, super excited to see what's ahead for you and hope we do this again sometime down the road.
Thanks so much.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Bob, it was light when we started. It's dark in your area when we're finishing. I think I've kept you guys here for too long, but thank you guys so much. We will talk to everybody soon. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.